Good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar, Dizziness After Traumatic Brain Injury. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kim Stranero, and I'm a Community Outreach Specialist at the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey, as well as the Director of CAMTRAC. The Alliance is a nonprofit organization with a mission to provide education, awareness, prevention, strategies, advocacy, and support for those who have been affected by brain injury. Closed captioning is available for this webinar. Look for the closed captioning icon labeled CC at the bottom of the screen. Click the icon to enable closed captioning. I would like to announce that we will be hosting another webinar on June 9th, 2026, titled Reclaiming Your Recall: Memory Supports for Life After Brain Injury. More details will be coming in the next few weeks, so stay tuned. We also have an exciting upcoming event called Exploring New Paths: Complementary Therapies After Brain Injury, which will be held on Sunday, June 14th from 9:30 to 1:15. This is a great opportunity to learn about a range of expressive therapies such as music therapy, sand play, yoga, improvisation, and horticultural therapy. Scan the QR code or check out our website for more information, and I'll also share this flyer on the screen here. So now I just have a few housekeeping notes before we begin the presentation. Attendees' microphones have been muted, so if you have any questions during today's webinar, please put them in the Q&A. We'll get to as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. And the webinar is being recorded and it will be available for viewing on the BIANJ website. At the end of the webinar, a link for a post-webinar survey will be placed in the chat. We do value your feedback, so you're encouraged to complete the survey, and you must complete the survey in order to receive your certificate of attendance. Once you complete the survey, you will automatically receive your certificate of attendance via email. Another reminder that closed captioning is available. Look for the closed captioning icon labeled CC at the bottom of the screen. Click the icon to enable closed captioning. Our presenter for today's webinar is Dr. Jennifer Stostis. Dr. Jen is a doctor of physical therapy and board-certified neurologic clinical specialist. Dr. Stostis holds certificates of competency in vestibular rehabilitation from Emory University and advanced vestibular physical therapy from the University of Pittsburgh. She has been practicing for more than 15 years in outpatient practice settings and specializes in the evaluation and management of adults with neurovestibular, concussion, and other complex balance disorders. Dr. Stostis has also worked in the rehabilitation technology industry for companies that make force plate technologies, wearable sensors, virtual reality, remote therapeutic monitoring, and other digital health platforms. She is pursuing her PhD at Seton Hall University, where she has also taught in the Doctor of Physical Therapy program. Her research focuses on the use of technology in rehabilitation practice. I am pleased to welcome Dr. Stostis.
There we go. Thanks so much, Kim. I was switching from my computer screens and my microphone. I'm so happy to join today, and thank you for inviting me. As we go through today, the agenda is quite broad. We're going to talk about what dizziness is and the body structures and different sensory systems that can create this sensation, this symptom. Then I'll speak about some treatments of dizziness after traumatic brain injury and other types of related injuries, and different types of vestibular rehabilitation to address symptoms of dizziness. Hopefully, at the end, we'll have plenty of time for questions. I've provided some resources at the end of the presentation. And we'll really try to encourage, I want to encourage everyone to, if they're having these symptoms, to really find a provider that they can have these conversations with, to have an individualized approach to their symptoms. So to begin, what is dizziness? Well, broadly, it's just a sensation of disturbed or impaired orientation. And to make it even more succinct, we think of dizziness as just generally being disoriented. That's the biggest umbrella that dizziness fits under. And when my patients come to me and they're telling me what they're feeling, dizziness might be one word. Sometimes people say that they feel woozy or off, or they feel a little drunk in their body or in their head. But whatever the person is feeling, it's really important to remember that it's a symptom. Dizziness is not a diagnosis. And I like to remind my patients that to describe their symptoms as best as they can. It can be really hard to define what this is. So when we think about dizziness being a symptom, symptoms are what is subjectively reported by my patients, for example. When someone tells me that they have a symptom, it's my job as a healthcare provider to look for a sign, to be able to test and see where these symptoms might be coming from. Dizziness can also be very challenging, not just to report what people are feeling, but even to test where dizziness is coming from. And not all dizziness has the same cause of these symptoms. So it's really important to identify not just the symptom, but what is causing the symptom to create an individualized treatment plan and make sure we're addressing the right cause of the symptoms. So as I mentioned, disorientation is kind of the biggest umbrella. People are reporting to me that they're just feeling off. And that can be the sensation of dizziness, or sometimes people report an abnormal sensation of movement. This is the definition of vertigo. And oftentimes that type of abnormal sensation of movement is described as spinning. Either my patients feel like they are spinning or the room is spinning around them. The sensation of swaying, rocking, bobbing, floating, pulling, this can also be defined under the word vertigo. Remembering these are symptoms, not diagnoses. So when someone reports disorientation, dizziness, or vertigo, or any of those sensations, the signs that I'm looking for, the things that I am testing for, are eye movements and then changes of body position or different types of head movements. When someone tells me they're dizzy or disoriented or they feel like they're spinning, the first thing I want to do is look at their eyes to see we say our eyes are the windows to the inner ears. And I want to see, is something happening in my patient's eyes? Is there an abnormal movement of the eyes that could be creating a movement of the environment that could be dizzying and disorienting? That one type of abnormal eye movement that we describe or that we're looking for is called nystagmus. And nystagmus generally is a beating of the eyes while people are walking or moving around the world. If the person's eyes are not moving, if they're nice and steady and they're moving together in all different directions and they can jump and find different objects, we call that saccades. If that is normal, then I might have the patient move their head, or I might move their head to see if their head movements are also causing these symptoms of dizziness or vertigo. And I might move the patient's head while they're sitting, or I might have them lay down and move around or roll on the physical therapy mat as part of my examination to determine where these symptoms are coming from. Now, it's not always a one-to-one ratio when the person says something that I can find a sign that is matching to that, but it's a general way that we should be practicing as healthcare providers. Another symptom that patients report to me that can be related to dizziness or vertigo is the sensation of imbalance. And sometimes people say they feel imbalanced in their head, and sometimes people say they feel imbalanced in their body or imbalanced on their feet. They feel their body swaying or rocking. And when someone tells me that they're feeling imbalanced or unsteady, the type of test and measure, the sign that I'm looking for are body movements and balance testing. So when I hear someone tell me what their symptoms are, I'm trying to test to see where these symptoms are coming from. That will help me create a treatment plan. And because dizziness isn't complex enough, there are many different body structures and sensory systems that can create the sensation of dizziness, vertigo, or imbalance and unsteadiness. So in the picture on the right-hand side, you can see we have our vision, our eyes, or our visual system is one type of sensory system that contributes to the sensation of dizziness or imbalance and steadiness. The inner ear, we call this our vestibular system. And actually, we have two inner ears, just like we have two eyes. And both of the inner ears need to be working together to help us perceive normal movement. Our visual system and our eyes, what we can see around us, and then our vestibular system and our inner ears, how we're sensing our relationship to gravity. We also have other areas of our body, other sensory systems that help us determine where we are in space. We call this our proprioceptive or our somatosensory system. Part of our somatosensory system and proprioceptive systems are all of the muscles and joints in different areas of our musculoskeletal system. We have our vision, our vestibular, and somatosensory systems working together, processing information in the brain, our central nervous system, and that sends a signal. So the sensory information comes in, and that sends a signal to create a movement or our motor control output, our motor movement out. We'll go through each of these sensory systems, but it's really important to understand that role of the brain in how we're perceiving our information. The first sensory system, our visual system, takes information from what we can see around us, our eyes, and what we're seeing around us. And this helps us determine where we are and how we are in relationship to the world around us. When we can't see well, either structures in our eyes are impacted, or we're seeing things and not perceiving them accurately. This can give us a sensation of dizziness or disorientation. Also, if you can't see well in your environment, you may trip or stumble, and that can also affect our balance systems. So we think about our eyes, what they see or don't see. It also helps us determine where we are in space or where we think we are in space. In this picture, you see the person is looking at an apple. When we see an object, it goes into our visual system, and then our brain processes what that object is and what the meaning of that object is in relationship to what we're doing. It's also important to understand that some simple objects or simple environments are easier for our brain to understand and process. When we have lots of color, busy environments, people moving around, um, different sensory challenges, we would call a challenge, visual challenge, this can make us disoriented. What we see is what our brain perceives, and what our brain perceives makes us how we feel. So when the world is quite busy, our brain can be disoriented because of that. It's also important to understand what we cannot see. So when we don't have the ability to use our eyes, when our eyes are closed, or when the environment is dark, it makes things like our balance more challenging. And that can also make us feel disoriented to where we are in space. The next area I'll talk about is the neck. And the neck is really an important part of where our brain and our head thinks we are in space. You can see in the picture, this is the back of someone's head and the upper cervical spine, which goes from the base of the skull to the first cervical vertebrae, C1 and C2. This area of the body has more sensory receptors, more nerve endings, and even our fingertips. So it's a very highly enriching area that we cannot see with our eyes. We really use our muscles, our tendons to feel where we are in space. And the neck helps us also move our head, which will become important when we talk about the inner ear and our vestibular system. So we have many different muscles in the back, in the entire neck, but especially in the back of the neck that help us with smooth and controlled movements. And when that system has been affected by a traumatic event, a whiplash, or other sort of neck injury, it can be disorienting to not have good sensation, not have good proprioception of where our head is in space. When someone has a neck-related injury, a concussive event, a whiplash injury, some sort of fall or a car accident, this can impact the structures of the neck and make people feel the sensation of dizziness or disorientation. We think about balance. Most physical therapists will be testing balance from what people are doing with their feet and where they're standing, different foot positions, different surfaces. But it's really important to remember that proprioception, our somatosensory system, is not just our feet, it's the entirety of the body, all the way up through the head and neck. So when people are feeling disoriented after a traumatic brain injury, it's probably not their feet that have been affected, but probably the proprioceptive information coming from the upper body, the head and the neck. The other thing to know about the word proprioception is the sensation of where we are without seeing where we are. So if we go back to this previous slide, remembering that the entire backside of our body we cannot see. And so having a good amount of proprioception, where we think we are in space, knowing where we are without seeing, is really important to our orientation or symptoms that are disorientating, which is dizziness. And then the inner ears. I mentioned there are two inner ears. We call these our vestibular systems. These also play a very key role in where our brain thinks we are in space. We call that spatial orientation and our relationship to gravity. My specialization is working with individuals who have symptoms of dizziness, disorientation, vertigo, and other balance problems. And the first thing I look at is there a problem in the inner ear or from the information going from the inner ear to the brain? When we see a picture like this, it helps us understand where the inner ear is. It's not from the outside of the ear into the ear canal. We can't see it. It's behind the eardrum, and even deep to that. The inner ear is a bony system and it sits inside the skull. It sits inside the temporal bone of the skull. We see a picture like this. It looks like the inner ear is really far. The vestibular system is really far from the brain. But really, that inner ear is very, very close to the brain stem. And the signal that goes from both inner ears into the brain happens very quickly. It's a very short connection between the information coming from the inner ears into the brain and getting processed. When we talk about dizziness and the vestibular system, we talk about the peripheral, the inner ear part of the vestibular system, and also the central vestibular system. It's really hard to discriminate, to differentiate what is the inner ear, the peripheral system, and what is the brain, because we can't see it with the naked eye. And it's also quite small. The inner ear is about the size of your thumbnail. So here's another picture of the inner ear. And if we thought the brain was very complex, the inner ear is even more complex in such a very small amount of space. So in the center of the screen, you see a little shell, a little spiral, and this portion of the spiral, let me use a laser pointer. This portion of the spiral is the cochlea. That's the part of the inner ear that's responsible for hearing. It sits oriented kind of to the front of the head. The back portion of the inner ear is what we call our vestibular system. This is the area that is responsible for our equilibrium and sending signals to our brain for our brain to process equilibrium. In our vestibular system, we have two little jelly bean-like structures. We call this our otolithic organs. And if you think that the inner ear is the size of the thumbnail, these little jelly beans are maybe the size of a rice kernel, very, very small. And in that little jelly bean, we have a lot of gelatinous membrane that has many, many, many small hair cells in the membrane that go to the nerve of the inner ear. On top of that gel, we have these crystalline structures called otoconia. They're calcium carbonate crystals, and they have a little sensation, they have a little density sensation of weight that they provide into this jelly bean. When we turn our head, the crystals move with everything, and the brain gets a signal of where we are in relationship to gravity. The other portion of our vestibular system are these three semicircular canals, and they're called semi because they're half a circle. Each of these semicircular canals has a base, and the base has more hair cells that send signals to the other portions of the vestibular nerve. Inside the semicircular canals, we have a membrane, soft, squishy membrane, that sit inside of this bony vestibular system. So the blue portion is bone, the orange portion is soft membrane, and inside that soft membrane, there's a fluid. This is what we call the fluid of the inner ear. And even though we're calling it fluid, it's really, really viscous. I use the visualization of something like motor oil, where it's really thick fluid that's in this inner ear. And that's really important because it's not swishing around or swishing around very quickly. When we move our head, it's a pretty slow motion that sends a signal to the nerves, that sends the signal to the brain where we are in space. And this tiny little vestibular system, one on each side, tell our brain a lot of information about orientation. So if any of these small little structures are impaired, they had any damage to the structure itself, it can lead to a sensation of disorientation. Also important to remember that the inner ear is connected to the brain through our nervous system. And we have nerves that go from different sensory systems to the brain and out, and they speak to one another. We call these our reflexes, and a reflex is something that goes through this nervous system so quickly that we don't even recognize it's happening. One example of a reflex is when the stove top is hot and you place your hand on a hot surface. You probably will move your hand away before you even recognize that you touched something hot. It happens automatically. And these types of reflexes of the vestibular system that go to the brain, to the eyes, to the neck, and out to the rest of the body happen very, very, very quickly. Remember, there's not that much distance between the inner ear and the brain. So on the top left, one of the most important vestibular reflexes is the connection between the inner ears and the eyes. We call this the vestibulo-ocular reflex. When we move our head, our inner ear sends a signal to the brain to move to the eyes to keep our world from moving, to stabilize our vision. On the bottom right, we see our cervico-ocular reflex. When we turn our head, not fast enough for the inner ear, but slow enough for the eyes and the neck to talk to each other. We call that the cervico-ocular reflex. The neck moves, the eyes stay on target. Keep our environment, keep our visual world still and stable. The bottom left, we have our vestibulo-colic reflex. Our neck moves, it triggers movement of the ear that sends a signal to the brain. Our vestibulo-colic reflex helps us keep our head upright in relationship to gravity. So if our eyes cannot stay on target, our neck helps our head stay upright and oriented, so that it helps us have the best sensation of gravity and visual reference point. On the top right is our vestibulospinal reflex. When our inner ear sends a signal to the brain, that sensory information comes in to give us a motor output to keep our balance steady. So when we feel like we're going to fall, the inner ear is the last signal that kicks in to tell the brain to keep our body upright. These four reflexes are connections between the eyes, the ears, the neck, and then out to the rest of the body. They also get processed in the brain. So when we have a reflex that is not working fast enough, it may not be a problem in the inner ear. It may not be a problem in the eyes or on the neck. It may be a problem with how quickly the brain is taking the information and doing something with that or making sense of that. And that slowed response, that slowed reflex that happens after a brain injury or other damage to different areas of the brain can lead to those delayed responses, that symptom of dizziness or disorientation. Here's one example of the vestibulo-ocular reflex. On the left-hand side, a normal, healthy inner ear and functioning brain will be able to sustain a head movement and have the eyes stay on target within 500 milliseconds, really, really, really fast. As our head moves, our eyes should move equal and opposite to keep the world around us still. If that reflex is slowed, our neck has to be the backup to help keep the eyes in place. This is how the vestibulo-ocular reflex works with the cervico-ocular reflex. Depending on the speed of head movement and the speed of the reflex, the speed of that nerve signal that's going from the ear to the brain to the eyes, and then the neck. When our head and neck move, when we have a signal from our neck muscles, our proprioceptive system, our muscular system, when that signal from the neck happens, the fluid of the inner ear moves, and that's also another stimulus of what triggers this reflex for the eyes to stay on target. So the vestibular system helps to stabilize the visual world around us, as well as the head on our body, so that we have a good horizontal and vertical reference point. With all of this sensory information coming in from the eyes and the ears and the neck and all over the body, even down to the feet, the brain has to take this information and make sense of it, do something with it. When the brain processes these sensory signals, it helps us helps to give a perception of balance and stability. If what we're seeing around us is coming into the brain as quickly as how we're moving through the environment, we feel steady and balanced. When what we're seeing and moving and feeling does not match with how quickly the brain can process, this can lead to the sensation of dizziness and disorientation. So in addition to these reflexes happening quickly, after a brain injury, sometimes the signals get slowed. And that mismatch can create a disorientation, which can feel like dizziness or vertigo or imbalance. And in some people, they also report things like nausea or motion sickness. The brain doesn't like to be off balance, and that's why a mismatch of sensory information into the brain can make us feel hard to describe what's make it hard to describe what we're feeling. This is a picture of, or several pictures of different structures in the brain itself. So while our eyes might be healthy and working normally, the ears might be healthy and working normally, the neck muscles might be healthy and working normally. After our brain injury, we can have different structures of the brain affected. In a moderate or severe brain injury or acquired brain injury like stroke, different areas of the brain can have damage to the cortex itself. And depending on the area of the brain that has damage or the tissues of the brain that have been affected, um, people might feel different symptoms. If someone has damage to the occipital region or the back of the brain, they might have more visual problems, more visual sensations, difficulty seeing objects or perceiving what they're seeing. People can have damage to the frontal part of the brain, and that can affect their movements and how they're reacting. After a mild traumatic brain injury, we don't see different structures of the brain damaged. We can't see a mild traumatic brain injury. So what we're what we test for is how those reflexes are happening. When we can't see where the damage is, we're looking for how the eye movements are responding, the balance systems are responding, and how the head and neck are coordinating between the ears, the eyes, the neck, and the balance. And while we're talking about our visual system, our vision as a sensory system, our inner ear, our equilibrium as a sensory system, our proprioception or sensation, somatosensation as a sensory system, we have other sensory systems that can be affected by traumatic brain injury that can also be disorienting for us. Our sense of smell, our sense of taste, our other sensory systems, in addition to our sense of sight, our sense of equilibrium or sound, and what we're feeling, our proprioception. Any of these sensory systems that are out of balance can lead to sensations of dizziness or disorientation. If you can't taste what you're eating, that doesn't send that is a mismatch of signals. If you can't smell the sensations around you, you could also be disoriented. And some of these sensory systems can be hyper impacted. When someone has a heightened sense of smell or a heightened sense of taste, that can also be disorienting to the brain. It's another picture of traumatic brain injury. On the left-hand side, these are our neural signals, our nerve signals in a healthy, functioning brain that's working very, very quickly. As I mentioned, with a mild traumatic brain injury, we can't see. This is a kind of a visualization, a drawing of what these signals might look like. We don't actually have good imaging to see how all of the processes of the brain, all of the signals of the brain are working together. So when we have a traumatic event, like a concussive event or a whiplash event, these nervous signals, these nerve signals can have damage between the connections. After a concussive event, sometimes people have some of this shearing or almost like fraying of electrical wiring. The nerves are not getting from point A to point B very smoothly, very quickly, and some of those nerve pathways can have disruptions. When our nerve pathways are disrupted, we can feel abnormal sensations. Sometimes that abnormal sensation feels like pain, And sometimes that abnormal sensation feels like dizziness or disorientation. A lot of times I have patients who report swaying or pulsing in different areas of their head and neck. And the term that they're using is dizziness, but that can also be another sensation for pain. Sometimes these symptoms get mismatched and mixed up in the brain. When we have a disruption of the central processing, these nerve signals, we can get other types of disorientation, visual disturbances, dizziness, um, blurred vision, double vision, and sensitivity to light or sound. Any disruption in our central nervous processing can lead to a perception of abnormal sensation in any of the sensory systems that we talked about. So when someone is reporting a symptom of dizziness and disorientation, and I know that they've had a traumatic event or traumatic brain injury or other concussive event, like a whiplash injury, what I'm listening for is what their symptoms are. Do they feel oriented or disoriented? Do they have normal sensation? Do they have normal sight, normal hearing, normal strength, normal range of motion? And anytime someone is telling me that they're disoriented, they feel an abnormal sensation, or they have imbalance after a traumatic brain injury, it's really important to find the cause of that symptom. So anyone who is experiencing symptoms at any age after a traumatic brain injury or other concussive event should seek treatment that is related to their symptoms. It's really important that caregivers of individuals who have survived a traumatic brain injury also help advocate for when their family member or friend, the person that they're giving care to, does not feel well. It can be really hard to describe these symptoms. And so caregivers play a vital role in observing if someone's mood is changing, if someone's balance is changing. And that might prompt the need for an evaluation. And even when a traumatic event has happened many years ago, symptoms can change over time. So when someone is reporting dizziness, disorientation, abnormal sensations, it's really important that they seek treatment no matter how soon or long after that traumatic event has happened. Dizziness, vertigo, imbalance, and these other related symptoms can occur immediately following a traumatic event or can develop over time. And if someone has had a traumatic brain injury, the symptoms can get worse many years after. Just like other muscles in different areas of our body get weak over time, if the brain is weak in the signaling, that can also lead to increased symptoms anytime after that brain injury. So when someone is reporting disorientation, dizziness, imbalance, balance problems, it's important to find a healthcare professional who is specialized in assessing the signs for these symptoms. Not all healthcare providers are specialists in the brain or the inner ear or the neck. And so it's important to ask about different healthcare providers' experiences and their training. I'm a neurologic physical therapist, and I'm also specialized in the inner ear and working with individuals who have symptoms of balance dysfunction, dizziness, and vertigo. Not all neurologic physical therapists are specialized in these areas. And not all vestibular physical therapists are specialized in how the brain processes the information coming from the inner ear. but certainly a neurologic physical therapist or a vestibular physical therapist would be a good place to start when looking for a healthcare professional who has training in these areas. It's also important when looking for a healthcare provider that you ask about what their approach to treatment is. Whether it's a physical therapist, a neurologist, a neuropsychologist, it's important to understand what types of patients these providers generally see and how they approach their individualized care. And just like all healthcare providers have different approaches, in vestibular rehabilitation after a traumatic brain injury, we have some frameworks of where we might start our evaluation, where we might start our investigation of what's causing the patient's symptoms, but there's not a standard approach for every patient reporting the same symptoms. In the next few slides, I'll show you some different tests and measures that I use in my physical therapy and my vestibular rehabilitation after someone comes in with a brain injury or post-concussive event. First, I ask my patients about their symptoms, and because these can be hard to describe, I use different patient-reported or self-reported questionnaires that ask different questions about daily activities, and my patients can rate a percentage of difficulty, a percentage of confidence. They can rate yes, no, or sometimes if these activities um, relate to their dizziness or unsteadiness. On the right-hand side, you see the visual vertigo analog scale. This is another way that the inner ear and the visual system interact with the brain. When our world is not clear around us, we can have visual vertigo, an abnormal sensation of the world moving around us. In the middle, the dizziness handicap inventory. This is probably the #1 questionnaire that I give to all of my patients to help them describe what their symptoms are of dizziness or imbalance. And on the left-hand side, the activity-specific balance confidence scale, the ABC, is a questionnaire I give to my patients to help them rate how confident they are that they will maintain their balance and not lose their balance or become unsteady during different activities. Specifically related to concussion or mild traumatic brain injury, there's a questionnaire called the Concussion Clinical Profile Screening Tool. This is a series of 29 questions that my patients answer: none, mild, moderate, or severe. And during each of these activities, depending on what they're rating their symptoms, it helps me determine where my care might begin, what types of tests and measures I need to do, and what might be driving or causing their symptoms. On the right-hand side, you see 2 different concussion clinical profiles. And we use this not just for mild, but also can be used for moderate or severe brain injury. Previously, the early days of this concussion clinical profile, we identified 6 different drivers or 6 different areas that could be impacted after a concussive event. On the right-hand side, our concussion clinical profiles have been updated, that we see our visual system, our vestibular system, our emotional systems, our cognitive systems, and also after a traumatic event, individuals can experience headache or other post-traumatic migraine. Outside of those 5 different profiles, 5 areas we might focus our rehabilitation on. On the left-hand side, sleep, and on the right-hand side, the cervical spine or the neck. Anytime someone comes to me after a concussive event, I want to be asking about their sleep, how well they're sleeping, how long they're sleeping, the quality of their sleep, because if sleep is impacted, has been impacted by a concussive event or other traumatic event, that can cause symptoms of visual disturbances. Poor sleep can cause symptoms of disorientation or fogginess. Poor sleep can also lead to headache or migraine or other cognitive or emotional changes. Just like sleep can impact all of these different areas of concussion rehabilitation, the neck, the cervical spine, when someone has traumatic whiplash injury to their neck, that can cause symptoms of dizziness and disorientation. That can cause symptoms of blurred or unstable visual environments. The neck is also a driver of headache or post-traumatic migraine. So when someone comes to me after a concussive event, I ask this concussion clinical profile screening tool to help me identify which of these areas might I need to focus my testing, my evaluation of the signs that help point to the type of rehabilitation we might need to do. But it's really important that it's not just about doing movement and about doing rehab. It's about asking questions about sleep, about the health of the neck, because there can be overlapping features between these areas. Another specific type of tool I use in my post-concussion rehabilitation is called the vestibular ocular motor screen, the VOMS. In the VOMS, the VOMS, the VOMS, we have different eye movements that we assess for, different signs where we're looking at eye movements. And I ask my patient to rate their symptoms of headache, dizziness, nausea, or fogginess. And they rate these symptoms from 0 to 10 based on different eye and head movements. This helps me identify, in addition to the clinical profile, which types of movements are creating the symptoms and which types of movements might I want to include in my rehabilitation. In addition to eye movements, there's a modified motion sensitivity test we use in rehabilitation where we ask our patients to move their head in different positions. And again, they rate the intensity of their symptom from 0 to 10 and how long that movement increases their symptoms for the duration of their symptoms. So these are two tests and measures that I use after I ask my patients about their symptoms and I quantify what area I might want to start working in that concussion clinical profile. Then I start looking at specific tests and measures that match with each of those clinical trajectories. And when someone tells me they feel unsteady or off balance, the types of balance tests and measures I look for help me identify if the person is at risk for falling or if there are other types of functional activities that put them at risk for falling. On the right-hand side, you see a report card, a physical therapy report card from the Academy of Neurologic Physical Therapy. We have a core set of outcome measures that we use in different types of clinical practices. And different types of balance tests and measures, balance outcome measures can be used for all types of balance testing. These give us some activities of balance to work on during our physical therapy. And it's really important that when I'm working with a patient that I know what their specific goals are. So two types of outcome measures that we use are related to our patient's goals. On the left-hand side, I might ask about the patient-specific functional scale. I ask my patient to identify between 1 and 5 activities that they cannot do currently, or they're not doing as well as they would like to. And they rate themselves from 0 to 10. Once I know the types of goals that my patient has, I can also help personalize their treatment program. And it's really important that while there are common treatment approaches, that the type of rehabilitation, the type of physical therapy that I give to someone is customized to their symptoms, what their scores are on the different testing measures I've performed, and it is related to what their personal goals are. On the right-hand side, some vestibular rehab, types of vestibular rehab probably should include some movements for the neck, some movements for balance, some movements for eye and head coordination, but that needs to be individualized to the person sitting in front of me. If their symptoms are more vestibular in nature or more visual, ocular in nature, if their symptoms are more related to their headaches or migraines, or they have neck dysfunction or difficulty moving their neck, pain or stiffness, I have to individualize how I provide that care. There should not be a blanket, um, generic type of rehabilitation program. It should be customized to every patient. One specific type of vestibular rehabilitation after brain injury is for positional vertigo. Most causes of positional vertigo are unknown or what we call idiopathic. But after a traumatic event, like a concussive event or a whiplash injury, there's an increased risk or increased incidence of positional vertigo. Positional vertigo occurs from these calcium carbonate crystals of the inner ear. We call those the otoconia. When those crystals break free or they get dislodged after a traumatic event, and they float through that viscous motor oil fluid of the inner ear. Here's a video of what that might look like. If the crystals of the inner ear get dislodged or displaced after a traumatic event, they can start moving through that fluid of the inner ear. And as the crystals move, it pushes the fluid, and it can create the sensation of vertigo. When someone reports vertigo after a traumatic event, we want to test if positional vertigo is causing some or all of their symptoms. We have different testing positions we bring people through to determine, do they have positional vertigo? And if they do, which ear is that positional vertigo related to? And which of those 3 semicircular canals are those crystals moving around in? We also need to know if the crystals are free floating or if they're stuck, because we have different types of treatments for each of those. We call them different canalith repositioning maneuvers for each of those causes if positional vertigo is part of the symptoms after a brain injury or other traumatic event. Some people after a traumatic event, a concussive event, or other brain injury can also have vertigo that's related to their neck. They can have vertigo we call cervicogenic vertigo, dizziness or spinning related to the structures of their neck. We can also see after a traumatic event, the crystals of the inner ear can be dislodged and in multiple canals or in multiple different areas. Another thing that's important to recognize is that after a traumatic event, people may not report to me that they're feeling vertigo. One type of difficulty the brain has processing sensory information is called agnosia. And when someone reports, someone comes to me after a traumatic event, I always want to test them for positional vertigo, even if they're not telling me that they're spinning. Because when someone has vestibular agnosia, they may not report the symptoms, but I may be able to see signs on my clinical examination that can help me create a treatment. So it's really important that providers take a very thorough examination of the patient's symptoms and look at a variety of signs, not just to rule in what might be causing symptoms, but also to rule out that it's not something more easily treated. So it's important that anyone who is experiencing dizziness, vertigo, or imbalance after a traumatic event or traumatic brain injury seek a provider and tell their providers how they're feeling. That will help them find a vestibular specialist. To find someone who is specialized in vestibular rehabilitation, I've provided 3 different resources in the handout. The first is through the Vestibular Disorders Association, vestibular.org. There's a healthcare directory to find providers like vestibular physical therapists, providers who provide psychology or psychiatry after a traumatic event or that creates symptoms of dizziness, and other healthcare providers like neurologists. The middle resource is called the Dizzy Care Network, dizzy.care. On this website, individuals can put their information in and be matched with a provider that can do different tests and measures that are related to their symptoms. And if a neurologist or a primary care doctor or other physician has referred you to a physical therapist for vestibular rehabilitation, you can find vestibular physical therapists at the Academy of Neurologic Physical Therapy's Vestibular Rehab Map of Providers. And of course, the Brain Injury Alliance of New Jersey has several other resources for survivors of brain injury and caregivers. So the takeaways for today, I hope you understand, and you probably do if you're on this webinar, that dizziness is complex and it can be invisible. It can be hard to see. So specialty healthcare providers can help match people's symptoms, what they're saying, with signs of how we're testing. And this might require specialty testing equipment, but should require advanced training and knowledge. It's important to advocate if you're feeling symptoms to speak with a healthcare provider who is specially trained and know where your resources are. If there's any questions, you can email me or you can email Kim to reach out to me. And then
Thank you so
find
much.
other references there.
Thank you. I appreciate you providing that really informative presentation today. I just wanted to answer 2 really quick questions in the chat. Someone asked about a pretest. That rest assured there was no pretest. It's just the post-webinar survey. And then someone asked if they could get a copy of the presentation after they fill out the survey. Yes, we will provide a copy of the slides and we'll have the recording available as well. So we're right at 12:59. So I just wanted to thank you again for sharing your expertise with us. Again, if anyone has any questions that were not answered today, please feel free to reach out to Dr. Stoskis or to me, and I'll put that in the chat as well. Whoops. I'm putting that in the chat right now. Okay. And one final reminder to please complete that post-webinar survey. Chris put it in the chat, so you can see it in the chat there. And you'll automatically receive a certificate of attendance via email once you complete that survey. So thank you again, everyone, for coming, and thank you for your thoughtful questions, and we hope to see you at the June 9th webinar. So that concludes today's webinar. Thank you again.